Chapter 4 Cursed Culture. Winds blew throughout their longer than usual sleep. Lorenzo and Shadow were satisfied with their day, although Hoax couldn't fall into the same category. They did have a physically comfortable sleep, however. After 9 full hours of rest, the first of them woke up. This time, it was Lorenzo, leaving his tent within 10 minutes of waking up. "I'm tired. Oh, nobody is up yet. That's great." He rubbed his eyes. "I'm not ready to get on the move yet anyway. Let me just sit down." Lorenzo mumbled to himself, stumbling to the rock he sat on previously. Instead of carefully sitting, however, he collapsed onto it. "I love you, sweet rock." He hugged it, clearly tired still. After giving affection to an unresponsive rock for a few moments, he fell asleep again. This sleep would prove to be quite major in the story of the heroes, or whatever they're called. This is due to what his friends saw an hour afterwards. Shadow was the first to wake up, leaving his tent in a reasonably short amount of time. "Nobody is up yet? It seems like it's already the middle of the day." Shadow scratched his head, looking around. "Nothing seems out of the ordinary." Wait, Shadow stopped upon seeing something shocking. "Hoax, wake up! I just saw something that'll most likely catch you off guard." Shadow explained, although it wasn't very persuasive. Hoax didn't wake up immediately. After some strategic methods, Hoax made a sound. "Holy crap!" Shadow gasped when he heard this. "You awake, Hoax?" He began interrogating the possibly asleep chef. "Hello?" He shook Hoax, resulting in something unexpected. "What do you need? Is it still morning?" He mumbled, rolling over. Shadow sighed in relief. "Finally! Get up! I saw something extremely odd. I need help." He explained, hoping for a reaction on Hoax's part. Then it happened. "Okay, sure." Hoax opened his eyes, getting up. "I was feeling lazy today, you know." He attempted to justify his previous reluctance to wake up. Yeah, just get out here and look at this." Shadow disregarded Hoax's justifications, leaving the tent quickly. "Alright," Hoax yawned, leaving. He didn't immediately notice what sparked such a reaction from Shadow earlier, until he received further clarification. "If you haven't noticed, I don't blame you. It took me a while to. Look here though." Shadow attempted to divert Hoax's attention to a broken piece of rope, pointing toward it. Hoax was confused. "I understand that's odd, but why wake me up solely to see that? Doesn't that feel like a waste of time to look into?" He turned towards Shadow, hoping for a valid reason. "I'm concerned due to one thing. Lorenzo is completely missing." He gave Hoax a serious look, that look being quickly reciprocated upon hearing the concerning news. "So that's what you're getting at. Let me check this out." He struggled to entirely accept this, looking inside Lorenzo's tent. Surely enough, there was nobody there. "Oh no, does this mean we need to become detectives?" Hoax looked towards Shadow, hoping for further clarification. "Yeah, I guess so. I have more clues, thankfully," Shadow explained, somewhat relieving Hoax. He gave Shadow a thumbs up. "Alright, so where does this investigation begin exactly?" Hoax started the question Shadow. "Well, you obviously need to ask for the clues I just mentioned, right?" He facepalmed. Hoax didn't realize. "Oh, right. Well, what did you find then?" He immediately showed immense curiosity. "I saw footprints, so we know which direction Lorenzo is in. Also, it seems like there's a slight amount of blood around the rock, which..." Shadow stopped, looking down. "I'm concerned too. Should we follow these prints then?" Hoax got Shadow to look back up, nodding instantaneously. Without another word, the two began walking towards the beginning of the footprints, stopping to look down at them for a moment. "Let's go then." Shadow began marching next to them, making sure to not ruin evidence. Hoax understood this way of thinking, walking on the opposite side of Shadow to set footprints. "Thanks for that." He turned his head to Hoax for a moment, receiving a thumbs up in return. After roughly 20 minutes of walking, they made it somewhere that was somewhat notable. "Look, more rope." Hoax pointed toward the ground. "Any trails in correlation with that piece?" Shadow turned his body toward Hoax, desiring confirmation. "Nope, guess we continue the same way as before. I mean, this only serves to confirm that path, right?" Hoax gave the bad news, attempting to conclude it in a positive light immediately afterwards. "I guess so. Let's get going. No time to waste." Shadow stretched, beginning to walk once again. Hoax looked around one more time, not seeing anything particularly notable, following behind Shadow once he had finished. By the time anything had happened, they had already walked 10 minutes worth of distance. By the way, what do you think happened to Lorenzo? Like, he clearly disappeared, but was it by his own will? Hoax seemed to fall into deeper thought than he usually did. Shadow shrugged. "I'd personally assume he was kidnapped. I mean, it sounds bad, but his fire powers are invaluable to a lot of people in these parts. he explained, slowing down as he did. Hoax understood this angle of thoughts, even slightly changing his own mind. I assume he went on his own will. Sure, it makes no sense, but who knows, people can do some crazy stuff sometimes, right? Hoax replied, managing to kickstart a somewhat interesting conversation. It could even prove important to their current investigation. They walked and talked for roughly 15 more minutes before they came across something that turned their situation from an investigation to an urgent mission. Lorenzo was unconscious, tied to a wood pole. Hoax was shocked, running toward the pole. "Come over here, we gotta get him out!" He frantically attempted to untie the otherwise complicated knots used to restrict their friend. Shadow shook his head. "I can't risk it. Look around. You were too shocked to notice the death camp surrounding us. If you can, get him. If not, we don't. We need a plan." He walked back into the cluster of large rocks surrounding said camp. Hoax was somewhat disgusted by this. He should learn to help his friends. He sighed, returning to his so far useless attempts at freeing Lorenzo. After a while of still falling short, he looked around for a brief moment. "Wait, a knife! Perfect!" Hoax suddenly sprinted toward the knife, however being knocked out before he could grab it. Shadow was struggling to scout out the area from the outside. "This camp is too complicated, I swear. If I need to enter this place, I'm done." He facepalmed, attempting to think of a helpful strategy. It took a while before something came to mind. He was aware of the fact that, if he used all of his strength, he might be able to get there perfectly fine, unscathed. But it took a while before something came to mind. "I'll go back to Hoax. I will need all the help I can get in the end." He took a deep breath, beginning to head towards where he last spotted Hoax. The walk was somewhat difficult for him due to the high amount of rocks, coming in all sorts of shapes and sizes. "This is getting annoying. Should I? No." Shadow shook his head, not wanting to give in to the temptation he had just experienced. After a while of walking, he began getting tired. It didn't help that the sky was growing darker than Shadow's perspective on life. He was forced to set up a tent, managing to in only 5 seconds. "Alright, cool. Time to reluctantly rest. I hope everything's fine with Hoax." He yawned, walking inside of his recently pitched tent. After a few minutes of rolling around, overthinking Hoax's situation, and generally stressing out, he managed to drift off to sleep, which was awfully contradictory for somebody who cares about their friends. His dreams weren't anything special, as there were absolutely none anyway. Mr. Hoax woke up. It was early morning, causing him to yawn at the sight of the skies. "Geez, where am I?" He looked around, going to rub his eyes, which caused him to notice one small detail. He was restrained by ropes in a near-identical way to how Lorenzo was previously. He immediately began to freak out, noticing Lorenzo right next to him. They were now both kidnapped. "Lorenzo! Lorenzo! Are you awake? Can you hear me?" Hoax instantly started screaming for help from his, unfortunately, unconscious friend. "Damn it!" He turned to the side, quickly disappointed by the situation. "Wait, what if Shadow helps? That's possible." Hoax talked to himself, looking around as much as he could, attempting to catch a mid-rescue Shadow. It never happened though. To make matters worse, a few other people made it to the duo first. They wore skull masks, feathers bursting from behind them as they chanted. What kind of ritual is this? Hoax only grew more anxious and stressed as more negative events began unfolding. They continued chanting, even waking Lorenzo up. "What's Pop? Wait, what the heck?" Lorenzo also began freaking out, immediately noticing the group of chanting weirdos. It grew worse as they started a fire underneath the two victims, clapping and continuing the chants. "Not good, not good!" Hoax tried to move his hanging rope around, away from the fire. "Where's Shadow?" Lorenzo frantically looked around, feeling an extreme heat under him. "No idea." Hoax didn't speak much, focusing on an escape. Lorenzo sighed. "This'll be a challenge to get out of then." He looked around, attempting to assess his surroundings. Sparks of fire practically attacked the two as they struggled to escape. "This is ridiculous!" Mr. Hoax yelled, clearly infuriated by the ritual taking place. "Yeah, I'm not one to discriminate, but when I'm being sacrificed, it sorta crosses the line." Lorenzo looked around, still trying to gather pieces of a plan. Over time, the chanting grew louder and louder, only becoming more scary for the duo atop the roaring flames. "You know, this really sucks," Lorenzo sighed, seemingly ready to give up after only 30 minutes. However, it made sense. Being above fire, drawing near death, that's not something you could consider motivating. Shadow had already woken up, drinking his bottle of water that nobody had any idea he owned. "I should continue my approach towards Mr. Hoax." He looked into the sky, eventually noticing something peculiar. Is that smoke? Shadow squinted, attempting to get a better idea of what this mysterious, colourless gas in the sky was. It's coming from where I left Hoax. Did he burn down their camp? He looked back down, resting his hand on his chin as he thought intensely. No, that can't be it. If not though, then it can only be one thing. Shadow looked up, gulping as he did. It's the other way around. He instantly turned, packing all his gear up and getting on the move. If I were Hoax, I wouldn't have left, right? He's slightly stubborn after all. He doubted his original assumption over the course of his walk, also realizing that all three of them were a bit stubborn. Forget it, he would stay. Doubting will only get me killed. That's what I was raised to believe. Shadow fluffed his empty white hair. Afterwards, he began walking quicker than ever before. He needed to make it to his friends. That smoke is a ticking time bomb. I need to go faster, he yelled to himself, running. The treasure too. He seemed somehow more serious than before. They struggled, still somewhat hoping Shadow would come to save them. What if we bargain? Lorenzo turned to Hoax, who was clearly in immense pain by now. Do whatever you need to, just get us out of here! He attempted to enter a fetal position to avoid the flames. It kinda worked, Lorenzo nodded. Of course, wait, he looked down in disappointment once he realized the looming problem over his plan. They don't speak English. He talked to himself, somewhat upset upon realizing this. Yes we do, one of the many cultists responded. Well, I'm a translator for our victim's last words, but it works. They shrugged, seemingly calm in the midst of the situation. What the hell? Hoax freaked out, losing his position and inevitably entering a state of pain once again. Lorenzo sighed. This is too much to handle in a single day. Well, did you hear what we were talking about? He calmly questioned the thing. You want a bargain, correct? If you have a good enough offer, I don't see why not, but remember, this is extremely important to us, and us is an extremely large group. You'll need something of outstanding value, sir, they explained, seeming like a bit of a smartass. Hoax cried, just get us out of here, what do you want? He tried to re-enter his previous position, failing each time. Lorenzo nodded. Okay, so what do you want? He attempted to maintain a calm state. Someone else, they replied, having asked their peers just mere moments before. The two immediately thought of Shadow, looking at each other and nodding. We have a friend that's around here, Lorenzo explained. My friend right here knows how to get to him. Can we show you? Hoax nodded, verifying Lorenzo's statement. The cultist thought for a moment. Sure. Don't try anything though. We have an immense arsenal of abilities. The cultist ordered for the fire to stop, pulling the duo out of their pickle once and for all. Thank you, let us lead the way. Lorenzo began walking, somehow unfazed by the fact he especially was tied up for a day and a half, possibly longer by now. Hoax followed, struggling to walk. Clearly, one was stronger than the other. The cultist followed, expecting to see their friend any moment by now. Where is he? They began to lose their initial patience somewhat hastily. Seriously, where? The cultist grew more angry as the two took longer to reply. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. He should be just over here. Hoax pointed toward a rock, clearly trying to say Shadow was behind it. Okay, let's make haste. The cultist began running, the duo still walking much to their dismay. Hey, I don't see anybody here. Are you sure you got this correct? They looked around, mildly confused. However, they grew significantly less confused upon the duo's next response. This is the place, the both of them shrugged. This isn't a proper bargain. This is a trap, isn't it? The cultist turned back towards the two people who brought them out here. Lorenzo sighed. Took you long enough to figure it out. We wouldn't sacrifice our friendship for you, he explained, Hoax clearly agreeing with him. Well, you know that I'm powerful, right? They began trying to defend themselves through words. Fight me then, Lorenzo taunted the cultist, fist in flames. They simply froze. Disappointing. He shook his head, the flames smouldering out. I do wonder where Shadow is still. Hoax looked around. That doesn't matter. Look, there's a group of them! Lorenzo's personality returned to normal, beginning to freak out. They had nothing left. He couldn't create fire, he couldn't fight back, there were simply too many enemies ahead of them. They froze. The cultists quickly closed distance as they could only feel despair. This sucks a lot, we're gonna be sacrificed. Lorenzo was on the verge of biting his nails, extremely anxious about what was taking place. Hoax wasn't doing very well either, thoughts rushing through his head at record speeds. As the cultists approached, they chanted their name, the Yuji Takano. Well, that's if it wasn't a plural. There's an S at the end, usually. Lorenzo was too scared and in shock to move in the slightest, completely stuck. It was like he was already being pulled down toward the ground by the very cultists they were facing. Shadow made it to his friends finally. Geez, they're in a pickle, he remarked, beginning to run towards them. Look out, he yelled. Hoax and Lorenzo both jumping away in surprise as he threw an explosive device into the group of cultists. Safe to say that's resolved. "So, you guys made it out alive, I assume?" Shadow quickly began a conversation with the friends he hadn't seen for a while, nonchalantly ignoring the cultists he just blew up. Lorenzo was too surprised by how quickly this all ended to speak, alongside Hoax, who stared blankly at the explosion site. "Okay," he said, fainting. "You guys are dramatic." Shadow rested his hand on the back of his neck. "You know, we can continue our adventure now. We dealt with the threat." He pointed out this obvious fact, Lorenzo blankly beginning to walk off, presumably in the direction of the treasure, despite the fact they were practically traumatized by this point. Shadow sighed. "This is great," he cracked his knuckles, grabbing Hoax and beginning to carry him. Hoax was completely out still. "Guess it's time to go, buddy." He put Hoax on his shoulder, following right behind Lorenzo. They didn't go for very long before their unconscious friend awoke, and even less time went by before nightfall came. They set up camp, sleeping like any other night they had experienced throughout their last week of fun? It was a mystery how they felt about their adventure right now. After an average night, they all woke up at roughly the same time to experience an average morning. Time seemed to be flashing by as they continued exploring. However, only the next day would be significantly less average. Nobody in the trio predicted this, therefore, a surprise would be in order. This would be far more horrific than a cult. It all began when they made it to their next biome, the desert. Once they made it here, something was immediately obvious. Katanas, ninja stars, machetes, you name it. They were lying throughout the place. These heroes would face their next challenge soon enough.